You're up, Jason.
All right. Couldn't remember if we had a deck with the title slide and I could see it or not. So welcome everyone. We are excited to have you here for today's webinar, Break the Bottlenecks, Boost Your Bottom Line. We launched this series last year and our goal was really to just deliver some actionable content to the CDE community. Each of us brings decades of experience into this channel. We've all seen companies struggle with the same things. And so we want to create a space for you to come and get some actionable insights that you can apply to your business right away. So on average, companies lose 30% of their revenue each year because of undefined processes and lack of clarity on sales pipelines and pipeline management, which is why we're focused on both of those topics today. So we're going to talk about optimizing your pipeline so you can turn more leads into revenue, and how to break the endless Q&A cycle so your team can move faster and work smarter. So as we go through the session today, use the chat section, drop your challenges and your questions there so that we can discuss those along the way. And before we get started, quick introductions. My name is Jason Sand. I'm a process architect and a Lean Six Sigma black belt. And that's really just a fancy way of saying I help companies fix the processes and systems that break when they scale too fast. Excited to dive in with everyone, so I'll turn it over to Brad.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. My name is Brad Pierce. I actually run a sales consulting firm called Simplified Sales, focused on small business growth and sales development. Over to you, Brett or Chris.
Yeah, so you guys, I'm actually remote today, so it's a little bit different of a background. I'm actually in a theater over at the ProSource headquarters. So I will be here mainly working in the background, playing with the comments and questions. But Brett Bjorkquist, I work for ProSource, and then also have my business Market Maker, where I help typically vendors, and then I help small businesses with any online education, webinars, and training that they may need for their teams.
And I'm Chris Smith. I own the Co-Team. I coach and consult businesses, and we help them hire for a fraction of the price of recruiters. I've been in the custom integration world for approaching 25 years. It's almost crazy to say that, making me feel very, very old these days. But we help companies with the people aspect of their problem, whether it's replacing talent, adding talent to scale, et cetera.
Absolutely. So why don't we get started here? I will share my screen up.
All right. So we wanted to teach just a quick lesson that I actually found really valuable when I learned it. Brett, you want to go to the next slide here? So when we were thinking about ways that we could add value to the integrator world, it made me think about this course. And I've taught this course at various buying groups, including Azione and HTSA. I've taught it to other integrators that I've worked with who aren't part of buying groups. But I remember when I actually learned this lesson, and it was a kind of an aha moment and pretty transformative. And it's pretty short to teach it, so I figured it'd be a great thing to drop for everyone, and then we can actually use it to have a dialogue for anyone who might have questions around it. And so the primer for this was I had walked into the office of my CEO, and I think I asked him a question, and he sat down and he said, "Do you not feel empowered to make this decision?" And it kind of led into this lesson, and so I want to teach it today. So if we're really smart, we want to delegate to our staff. And the problem with that is that sounds really simple, but it's actually really complicated. And it made me think of a joke by Mitch Hedberg, and you can jump ahead here. Mitch Hedberg said, the Sprite or the recipe for Sprite is lemon and lime, but there's more to it than that. And he's 100% right. So we think we're going to delegate down to people and like life's going to be easy. Jump ahead. But actually what we realize is that it's not that simple. We have to hire well, have process, trust our team, measure, all that kind of thing when we delegate to our staff. And even if we do all of that, next slide, people still come in and ask us these questions. They ask us these questions all the time, right? They're showing up into your office, they're sending messages via email, they're sending messages via Slack, and they've got nothing but questions for you. And you're like, well, I thought we trained well. I thought we did all these kinds of things. I thought we had process. I thought we had a method to measure. but these questions still keep coming up. Why is that? Jump ahead. And the answer to that is 4 reasons. Jump ahead. If we can figure out what those are each time they happen and who asks us and why, we can actually tackle the root cause of those things. And what's interesting about it is the root cause kind of falls into these 4 buckets. And today what we're going to cover are the reasons why those 4 buckets happen. Jump ahead. Typically, it's going to be one of these 4 things. So they don't know the answer. They don't know how to choose between 2 good answers. They ask as a way of telling, more like an FYI, or they don't feel empowered to make that decision. Go ahead. And if you actually look at each one of those things, there's a very simple correlative that coaches us out of or teaches us how to not have that problem anymore. So when they don't know the answer, it's just a training thing. We've never trained them on how to do the thing. That might be train them how to use a piece of software, a piece of technology, what have you. Sometimes it's a question of training around management. That person's having that issue because they actually never learned how to be a good manager and they're having a problem with a subordinate. So training is a pretty easy thing to understand. How do you know that you'd have that training covered? Because you can physically show it to me and you can show me whether they've been trained on it and signed off on it. So if you don't have that thing, that's an easy fix to do. Next one would be they don't know how to choose. So they've got 2 good options in front of them, maybe have 3 good options in front of them, but they're not sure which one to pick. So this is no longer a training question, it's a core values question. If you've got excellent core values, your core values will help make decisions between good decisions. Now, if 2 or 3 of those options all meet your core values, pick one. It's pretty easy. So we actually used to put our core values and the descriptions of those core values right up on the wall. Our office actually had a front office and a back office. And so we actually put those core values with their description silk screened onto the wall. And the statement was, if at any point you don't know, look up, make a decision. The next is asking as a way of telling. This is quite possibly the biggest waste of time of all of them. And usually what it comes down to is the communication breakdown for how you communicate and your internal SLA about where you communicate. People don't need to be walking in your office to FYI as to how they decided. They need to literally put that thing into Slack. And if they were doing that, everyone would be informed as to what was happening. This one's a pretty easy one to fix. In terms of the last one, this is a really interesting one. People walk into an office, and this is why I had walked into that office that day. And I didn't believe I was empowered to make that decision. That's not my job. That's the boss's job. If I make this decision, the boss might come down on me hard for making the decision. Any culture of a business that actually empowers their people to make decisions is a better culture than the other way around. Now, they have to have been trained on how to do it. They have to know your core values. And these things they're making decisions on actually have to be aligned to what they're allowed to make decisions on. So if you're in an EOS methodology, this is called your accountability chart. The accountability chart tells you what people have the authority or empowerment to make decisions about. So one possibility here is that they are empowered, but they don't know it. Another possibility here is that they are literally not empowered to make that decision because it's never been outlined in a document that should say it. So these are always really great ones. In my case, the boss looked at me and said, "Do you not feel empowered to make this decision?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Congratulations, you are," and kicked me out of his office so I'd go make the decision. And I think if you really start to do that really well as a business, you decentralize the decision making to the people who are trained to do it, and then you force them to act well. And then the way we always treated it was, hey, by the way, while you're feeling empowered and trained, let's fail small and fail forward. Like, let's fail one time on the same type of failure. And let's make sure that if we fail on your decision making, it's not going to cost us a lot. And so usually that kind of helps people frame, what they're supposed to be making decisions on and not as well. Next slide. Now that we know that those are the 4 buckets, and now that we know that we're starting to think about where we're looking for those types of problems, let's talk about how to deploy that into practice. Next slide. So I like to think about this with the folks that are just directly below me. And typically those folks are going to be in a managerial set. And the entire point is to teach this to your managers, get them to embody it individually, and then they will teach it down to their subordinates. Next slide. It's very simple. You can use an Excel sheet or a Google sheet, or in some cases, we're using Slack lists to capture these as requests. I need to know when it happened. I need to know the name of the person that asked the question. I need to know which type of the 4 it is. And I need some kind of a reminder as to what the question was. I don't need the full verbose thing, just some rough idea. Once we start to capture it, this is the methodology of what gets measured gets done. We're starting to measure where the problem is. Let's jump ahead. Go ahead and click through. Okay. You're going to start to realize as you look at this grid that there are key types of things that are repeating themselves in the data you're looking at on that red button list. If it's the same person, but different types of issue with the same person, I think we have a person problem. We're probably going to need to go fix that person, up to and including firing them. We might have different people, but the same type of issue. So as an example, maybe everyone is always having this empowerment discussion, and it's happening across lots of people. What's that likely tell you? We probably need a better accountability chart that lays out who's empowered to do what. Next part, you should not just be answering questions. Horrible idea, because it doesn't fix the red button issue. We need to sit down and understand what it is, put it on the list, and revise the list so that the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And as time goes by, you'll start to see these patterns of where the list is not getting shorter, whether it's your internal processes and procedures that are causing that problem, or whether it's an individual that's causing that problem, or whether it's actually happening only in one department and we maybe have a managerial problem of the people in that department. So it's a really helpful thing to try and figure out where the problem lies. Next slide. Once you've taught this to your managers, next time we want to teach it down below them. Next slide. And ironically, any questions? I hope you use this, take it back to your teams, figure out where these red button issues are happening. One of the easiest ways to identify who probably needs to learn this lesson, you know who's being red buttoned, and you also know which managers are jumping in to go be employees and doers rather than managers. Start right there. And if you start right there, you'll start to fix some of those problems. Feel free to grab this QR code, and happy to send you a copy of this document.
Chris, I'll throw a question at you. So you ran 2 different integration firms. Which was the common theme that you found, and was it different at each firm? Like you mentioned, you didn't feel empowered, but with the people under you, did you see a common theme at that company? And what about at the other one?
Interesting question. The company I started at, so for those that don't know, it was kind of 5-year blocks: integrator, manufacturer, integrator. I was pretty green and young at the first one. We were very small, small entity. I think we were never more than about 6 total people. Everyone wore a lot of hats. We were really collaborative in that environment. I definitely did not have anyone reporting to me at that level, so I don't think I had the red button questions coming at me at that point. But at the end, when I was running an integration firm in New York City, that company was actually very, very interesting. I had to learn that lesson probably as the COO of the company. So I was already managing that business, and I thought it was really good. When I learned that lesson, it dawned on me that if I had to learn it, had my managers learned it? And the answer was no, they didn't know it either, right? So it had to really propagate through the organization and actually become an ethos and a culture. Some people took to it very rapidly and readily. It was very, very simple for them to do that. And other managers, it was a little bit harder. And what you would find in our company, was reasonably large, it went over 30 people. Departments were different. How they managed was different. And the type of people within each department were also different. And so some of the teams didn't have this red button problem. And some teams absolutely had this red button problem. And when I started to realize, some departments are the manager's fault, and some departments are because of an individual, and some are our fault because we never deployed the process or the accountability charts that people knew. It was very interesting. It just helps you kind of frame the which tool am I picking out of the toolkit to solve the problem. It was just really good from that framing perspective.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I think the culture one I found interesting. I've sat through this presentation a couple of times that you've given, and to me, it resonates when I engage with a company. A lot of times the owner will say, well, how are you going to make my people or get my people to follow the process? And similar to what you said, I think the process is black and white, right? Well, our business isn't black and white. And so naturally they're going to run into some gray areas. That's where your culture and core values come in, because if there's a strong set of core values, it allows them to answer and navigate that gray area, right? Like that's kind of the way I think of it. So that resonated with me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Jason. You brought up a really kind of cool point about this idea of how do I get my people? So it's usually a manager, owner, operator saying this down to the other folks. How do I get my people to follow the process? You may find this too, but working with enough businesses, what I've also found is that not all owner operators follow the process of the business. And
Yeah.
so I think this, to me, it's an interesting cultural question about, do you want to really decentralize decision making? Very much in our organization, there was no way for me to make all of those decisions. And by the way, I had really smart people capable of making decisions, and I wanted them to make them. And I wanted them to know they were allowed to make them. And in fact, by them doing that, the evolutionary nature of making decisions and then learning from mistakes, if there were any, more stuff got done. It was fantastic. I did not want all those questions sitting on my plate. More specifically, I didn't want all those questions sitting on my manager's plate. I wanted their subordinates making those decisions too. That was really an evolutionary process for us.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I've seen in similar, I'll talk with dealers, and I was talking with one maybe probably 2 months ago now. But he was looking to retire, and so he wanted to kind of, slow down his business and transition it or sell it, preferably. And one of the questions I asked him is, well, who does sales? And it's like, well, I do. And well, who else in your organization can do sales? And nobody's empowered to do it, and I think we see that a lot, especially in the smaller mid-sized companies, where that owner feels that sense of requirement to help their teams, that they have to support those guys, they pay their paychecks and everything else, so they got to make sure that sale goes through correctly. And I think that teaching them, and this is where, like you said, Chris, it comes into training a lot on that side, is, have you been training? If you've spent 10 years being the only guy that does it and they just know to hand it off to you, you've built an organization built around you. And I think if you're really trying to be able to grow and scale, or getting ready to sell your business, or, there's a variety of reasons why, you really have to be able to take that step to say, how am I delegating these decisions so that I'm not the bottleneck for everything, so that I can either go work on more important things, and or be able to scale the business. And as you get through it, you don't want to be that only person, because, we're talking about the heart of the business now, but as you do look at succession planning, which is something that every owner should be thinking about, you need to be able to train that next generation, because that's what's going to get you the value add when somebody else is buying it. They want to know that there's a great salesperson on that team and a great marketing person on that team and all the operations and process work. And I think that comes into delegating, and that's something hard for a lot of us to do, but I think it's an important lesson.
You brought up a great point, Brett, where you talked about being able to go work on something important. The phrase we used for that was highest and best use. So
Sure.
I thought a lot about my highest and best use every day. What could I be working on? What are the things I need to let go of? But I was also thinking about that on behalf of my management team. So what is their highest and best use individually, team member by team member at a managerial level? And one of the things that dawned on me about seeing this red button list was their individual red button list was keeping them from their highest and best use. And they didn't know it in some cases. They knew they were busy, time constrained, like that kind of thing. But when we started to think about how can they get done these items on the list that we would really like for them to elevate and improve on, you'd start to hear, oh, if only fill in the blank wasn't on my list of stuff, how would we do that? And you're like, oh, this red button list is actually some of the stuff that's keeping them from their highest and best use. And so by teaching this lesson, it really did enable them to produce more, to execute better, and to really use their time super well, which made them feel more fulfilled because they weren't working on a bunch of nonsense every day. Like it just kind of felt right. And I've seen it now in enough different businesses where it just feels like this kind of thematic thing. It's almost like, nobody balances a checkbook anymore, but this is the kind of stuff they should be teaching in school, right? It's like super productive, helpful stuff every day.
No doubt.
Hey, Chris, if for a business owner that wants to implement this like framework, what would be one thing that you could tell them just to get started? Like, what's the very first thing as a leader that they need to do to take action on it?
Yeah. At a really simple level, just give that deck and as a group, talk about it in your management team. Just that. The first step is bring awareness to the idea. You can't fix something if you're unaware that it exists. And so I think it's almost like there were those games, like World of Warcraft, where you'd start off and everything around you was in the dark, right? And you'd move into a space and it would kind of be illuminated. Yeah. The first step is to illuminate it. So let's present that kind of information. It takes 15, 20 minutes. It's not hard. You can do it on your weekly meeting with your team. The next part then is start to measure. So just keep the list. So you don't have to fix anything, but like, how do you capture that list? Yep. And the answer is really simple. If it has a question mark on it and it's directed at you, it goes on the list. Like, it's not hard, right? Look, who sent it to me? What date did it show up? And what type of problem was it? All right. Now, if you want to do that in a Slack list where it's done as a form, amazing. We were actually dealing with a service team at one company. And one of the guys who was managing that team was so inundated nonstop with questions, he literally couldn't manage the team. So what's the solution? You no longer are allowed to text, email, or otherwise message that guy. It had to be done in a form. Because I wanted to know who was filling out the form and how often. And really what it was those guys had the training. They knew how to do it. They were just bugging their boss all the time. Well, by measuring it in this way, as an example, that person had to know that we were tracking the form request. You want to see how many forms started coming in after they knew we were tracking it? No, man, you have people making decisions, right? And it's like, but if on the other hand, it was, hey, all of our brand X is breaking all the time, and that's why we're making these phone calls, well, then we would solve that problem, right? And I think what's interesting about it is just by the act of measuring it, you'd be surprised at what starts to happen. So first step, start to have the discussion with your team. Next step, start to collect. And by collecting it, you'll then start to solve it.
And I would imagine the level of trust in the organization and communication just went to a whole nother level, right? I mean, it's probably a situation where people probably feel a little bit more comfortable or more straightforward. They have an avenue that they can actually go to with questions or just put something in Slack or whatever that might be when they just want to be able to keep somebody in the know about whatever it is that they're working on or whatever that might be. Because what I find,
everyone's got to run the business they want to run. But yeah, 100%. Like open communication, radical transparency helps a lot. But the other idea is like you want people to think on their action, whatever action they're taking. And so I think fundamentally, if that action's happening in open space, as opposed to behind a wall, that open space act of radical transparency naturally works itself out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense a lot.
That's great stuff, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. And if you have questions in the future, please let me know. I'm always happy to answer.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out in the chats for you. And at the end, we could throw some stuff in there for you, Chris. So, Brad, why don't we take a look at your stuff here? I'm going to pop you up on here. We'll present.
Cool. Yeah, I get a lot of questions, with a lot of integrators that I work with and just clients in general, talking a little bit about, how do we manage our sales pipeline? And one of the things that gets brought up all the time is like, what's the value of like managing a sales pipeline and why do I even need one kind of thing? And so you can kind of go to full screen with it, Brett, too, if you want to.
Oh, was it on? I'm sorry. It was on mine. I will correct that.
You're good. So to answer those questions, like what is a sales pipeline and why do I need one? Well, the biggest thing is there's really two things behind why you need a pipeline and what is a pipeline. So what is a pipeline is essentially kind of a visual representation of your sales process. And if you don't have a sales process in place, the likelihood of you mining new business and closing deals go down tremendously. And that is a very, very big gap in what I see a lot of organizations that don't really have a well-defined sales process. And how do you map that out? The second one is why do I need one? Well, you're tracking progress along the lines of your sales process, right? And Chris was mentioning this before, but you want to measure, right? And so when we think about driving revenue and we think about driving your sales, you can't improve what you don't measure. And the sales process, when you think about it, it can be a discovery call to presentation to close. And as simple as that might sound, you really do want to measure what your conversion rates might look like from getting the leads to a call or a meeting and then to the close. And then even at the close, how fast is that job actually starting? So there's a lot of different elements into it that I'll just go into here in a couple of minutes. But those are really kind of the high level overview of what is a sales pipeline and why do I need one? So if you want to click to the next one, Brett, according to HubSpot, most companies today, they do perform at at least a 33%, I would say even higher, when they actually have a formal sales process in place. That's how important this is. And so if you're running a business that's doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, it escalates pretty quickly when you realize that there's a lot of money that's being left on the table if you don't have a formal sales process in place. If you want to click to the next one, Brett, go to the next one. So this is kind of an example of, on a very basic level, you take a look at organizations and businesses today. This is typically what a sales pipeline will look like, or essentially what a visual representation of what a sales process look like, right? You have your sales rep that's going out there and they're mining for new leads or hunting for new opportunities. And that is what we call prospecting. And then the next phase after that, eventually what you want to do is you want to find highly qualified leads and get them into this qualification and really qualifying that they're actually a qualified buyer and move them to the next step of a presentation. That can come in the form, of course, obviously as a Zoom call. I know a lot of you guys out there use Zoom as part of your sales process and some of your meetings that you do. Some of you that do have showrooms, you guys bring clients in, builders, architects, or whoever that might be, inside the showroom as a presentation. And then typically what happens after that is obviously the proposals sent out, and you want to get a quick signature after that proposal is sent out. So this is kind of a baseline kind of sales process, or what a sales pipeline typically looks like. If you want to hit to the next slide, Brett. A lot of things that I see when I kind of take a look at pipeline audits, these are common mistakes that a lot of organizations make, and not just in our industry, but just in general across all businesses. They don't have a defined sales process, right? The sales process that they have in place is just kind of, hey, I'm going to make some calls. I've got a list of people that I want to make. And then hopefully we can get them on for a presentation, and then follow up with them to sign a contract or get a proposal out the door. But there's no formality behind it and no organized fashion to really measure progress and what the next steps are. Obviously, when we're talking about no tracking on the deal stages, we're talking a little bit more in detail around some of those other components. The deal stages are those different steps of the sales process. The other part of it too is that some of the things that happen is that the sales cycle could turn out to be too long. There's a lot of different things in terms of where you might be in the sales process that could turn into a misunderstanding of where some of the customers are, or where your prospects are in that sales process. And then the other part, is lack of deal insights. And as a sales leader or as a sales manager or as a business owner, the worst thing that you could have is just lack of insights to where we're at with the deal, what stages of the deal that we're in, no matter who you're talking to. Brett, if you want to hit to the next slide. So the questions that also get as well is like, okay, if we're going to build out the sales pipeline, what do I need to do to start building that out? If you want to hit to the next slide, Brett. So these are kind of the four like main high level components of what you want to have before you start kind of putting together, what your sales process might look like, or, what your pipeline might look like. So you've got to have prospects, right? You got to understand, what is your target list, who you're going after, who do you have in the pipeline, right? So it could be residential, it could be commercial customers, right? If you're working upstream, maybe you're looking at doing business development around strategic partners with specifiers like builders, architects, designers, those types of things. You got to have a list or a target list of people that you're going after. The second one is I would highly recommend as a team to sit down with your sales team and walk through what the current sales process might look like today and document that down. Now, Jason Sand obviously does a lot of the process documentation with a lot of his clients, and there's a lot of work inside of this that's more detailed that Jason could probably speak to. But you want to document what the sales process look like and understand where the gaps are, because, I think you and I both know that there's gaps in all sales processes. It's just a matter of closing that gap in areas that can move the needle the fastest, if you will. The third one is revenue targets. We really want to make sure that we have specific goals and just a basic revenue target, whether it's a quarterly. We typically plan for annual revenue targets, and then we break it down on a quarterly level. And then the last one, if you don't have one, you need to get one, and that is a CRM. And I know the CRM is like the bane of people's existence, because it's probably one of the most, underutilized tools, I would say, with a lot of sales teams, because they just don't know what to do, right? What'll happen is that businesses will go out there, they'll vet different vendors and different software vendors for CRMs. But the problem with that, before you purchase the CRM, is that you don't have a plan. Well, you got to sit down and actually have a plan first, and then evaluate the different type of CRMs. You got to have goals and objectives and rules and frameworks around how you want to structure that inside of your CRM. So that's kind of the high level pre-work that you want to do before you actually build a sales pipeline in general. So Brett, if you want to hit to the next slide. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the steps to build it. Go to the next slide. So as a team, what you want to do is kind of just take a look at these kind of 6 major high level areas. We want to identify kind of what I was talking about before, is identify a target list. Who's our prospective buyers? That's step number 1. Step 2 is when you map out what your sales process might look like, you want to identify what the pipeline stages are, right? And that's really, really important. 3, when you take a look at your target list, you want to take a look at where the biggest opportunities are, maybe where the lowest hanging fruit might be to attack it right away. And then on the fourth side, or on the fourth step here, you want to assign the activities per stage. And what I mean by that is, as an individual sales rep, there are certain activities that individual sales rep has to make as they're driving this sales process down the path. And so we want to identify what specific activities happen per stage. And I will tell you a couple different examples in this, and this is really, really important. On an average, a salesperson will only follow up with the lead 1 or 2 times, okay? The problem with that is that most of your leads or prospects will not engage with you after you just call them once or maybe even twice. And on an average, in order for any of those prospects to really re-engage with you, you've got to touch them at least 8 to 10 times before a prospect even engages with you. And so what does that activity look like from a follow-up process perspective? And I can't emphasize how important that specific activity is in closing your deals. But that's one example there. And then obviously track performance and metrics, right? We want to track data. So this idea of actually having more of a data mindset when you're actually driving revenue and driving your sales process is super, super important. And you got to stay up to date on it. And as a salesperson, it's really, if you've never used a CRM before and it's something new. And even if you've had a CRM for a while, look, as an individual sales rep or even a business owner for that matter, it's really, really important to stay disciplined and be on top of all the current data in the system every day and every week. So, all right, Brett, you can go to the next slide. So this slide here really just talks about probability. Okay, so when we think about the sales pipeline stages, one of the biggest things around driving a scalable company and driving incremental revenue is understanding the probabilities of your closing. So when you're forecasting, this is probably the most important thing that you can do to help forecast what your revenue might look like, 1 quarter out, 2 quarters out, or even annually for that matter. And so we define probabilities on each stage of the sales process or pipeline stage. And so when you're prospecting or even qualifying leads, right, there's low probability there. You don't really know anything about that prospect yet, or even the likelihood of them, wanting to do business because you're still in that relationship building mode. And even when you do a presentation with that particular lead or prospect, right, the probability is right around that 25% mark. Now, you guys can define what probability percentages will be for your own business, but this is kind of something along the lines of what we lean on. Obviously, once you get the proposal out the door, the likelihood of closing that deal goes up, right? It's a 50-50 shot for that deal to close when the proposal's out the door. Now, a lot of times when you follow up after the proposal, that prospect should give you feedback. Good feedback or even bad feedback, right? If it's more positive feedback, the likelihood of closing that deal is gonna happen more. But if it's kind of more, I don't want to say negative feedback, but not as strong as feedback, the likelihood of actually closing that deal goes down a little bit. And so you guys kind of want to just kind of figure that part out after you send that proposal and how you want to define what that step looks like. But that's a really, really important part of the sales process and closing more deals is this follow-up process after the proposal goes out. And then obviously the close date, right? We want to actually put a signature date on this. The probability of this obviously is 100% to close. But the reason why signature dates are so important is because that's really kind of the time clock that starts from the moment that this contract is signed to when the project actually is getting started in your business. And that's really, really important to measure from that perspective. So these are just some examples. My advice to you guys would be to understand how you want to measure the probabilities of closing your deals after each individual stage, as soon as you obviously define kind of what your sales process looks like. So if you want to hit to the next slide, Brett. So once you have this process in place and you have good data, you have your sales process in place, you have all your stages defined, you've got their probability scores, tied to each stage of your sales process. That is basically your roadmap that you can implement inside of your CRM to analyze. And now you're moving into this next step of now you're set up for success to actually use the CRM for its intensive purposes, if you will. And then from there, you actually have visibility 360 degrees across the entire organization, within the sales team, within the leadership team. And if you ask the reps to summarize each deal or keep up with the notes, you're going to be in the know of where you're at and remove any roadblocks or anything that you might come up against as you're working this deal with any deals, right? If you find deals that might be stalled out or a prospect might go dark, right? There's certain timelines when the proposal goes out and there is no signature date. So if it's too long of a gap there, you've got to develop an action plan quickly to pull that deal in, or at least pending deals, because a lot of them, again, they can hang out there if you don't follow up appropriately. And then last is obviously just aligning with your sales scorecard, right? You want to be able to build an accountability scorecard in terms of activity that your sales reps are doing on a daily, weekly basis, and then obviously just the revenue numbers that they're bringing in. All right, Brett, if you want to go to the next one. So really in summary, once you have all these parts and pieces in place, right, a good understanding of a healthy sales pipeline will increase your opportunities. It's going to improve your forecasting, and you're definitely going to be able to close more deals. Brett, you want to click to the next one. So I just put together a couple different additional kind of value adds. If you guys want this sales pipeline guide, just reach out to me and email me, and I can send it over to you. The other option is I've got an online sales assessment scorecard that's free. And you can actually just scan that QR code and take the scorecard, and you'll see kind of where you line up in terms of how well your sales process is put together and how well you're leveraging your CRM in a lot of ways. And if this QR code is a little bit too small to scan, it's simplifiedsalessassessment.com. Simplifiedsalessassessment.com. So that is it. So I'm open to any questions that you guys might have, and we'll go from there.
So Brad, you mentioned some things and I thought they were really, really great. And one area is I think everyone thinks about the CRM as like this evil acronym, it's like nothing but a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And I used to love our CRM and what it enabled people to do because it actually made things easier. It wasn't harder. It wasn't hard to put the information in. But more importantly, we actually used the CRM to tee up what was going to happen in your future. So when you made a phone call, there was just an option to set up your next phone call. And it was now in your calendar, and you literally opened up this thing and you're like, that's the thing I got to do right now. And then the next thing I got to do. So I never liked having to wake up thinking about what do I got to work on today. I just opened up my thing and there was all the stuff I had to do. And it made life really, really easy, not hard. And in fact, I think if people were to approach the look of the CRM more as an enablement tool than this punitive kind of time suck, I think it would be really interesting. So I wonder if maybe one of the reasons is that people just don't use them that way. So we used it for meetings, we used it for follow-up calls. The other way that you can do it is some of the CRM tools now have the ability to fully automate the drip so that it sends out the meeting request. And once the meeting request is booked, it stops the drip. So now you can just like open up your calendar and you're like, here's what I'm working on today, right? It's like kind of magical and you don't have to do anything. And I think there's just a lot of people that don't lever it at that way. I don't know, thoughts, ideas? Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been working for a fair amount of different organizations. I've used CRMs from Salesforce to HubSpot to Keep to other CRMs out there. And the biggest challenge is that a lot of these sales reps, they just don't know how to use the tool. And to your point, Chris, it's 100% a sales enablement tool. And for me personally, when I was in that sales seat, I'm like maniacal about analytics and tracking data and performance and all of that. And that was probably the number one thing that I really analyzed deep, because at the end of the day, as a salesperson, we're measured by performance, right? And so, I'd always had this kind of rule with at least my sales teams when using a CRM, is that if a deal isn't in the CRM, it didn't happen, kind of thing. And, I think a lot of what you can do to leverage the CRM is just not track your deals, but to your point, you can automate a lot of your different tasks. You can do a lot of different things in terms of outreach, emailing, putting together different sequences, making calls out, scheduling the right different ways that you can drive activity within those accounts or prospects. It's really, really awesome tool if you set it up right. But you do have to have a plan before you make a purchase. There's multiple conversations that I've had over the last couple months with dealers that went out and bought a CRM with no plan. So I would recommend have a plan first and then go out and evaluate.
Well, and I think that's a solid point in there, Brad, because there are so many tools of varying sizes. Some are at Excel sheets. I saw Bobby in there talking about Post-its. Everything is considered something, and it's better, as Jason put in the comments, better than just having it in your head, right? So that is absolutely right. But yeah, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, it's hard to pick the right tool. You either go above or below what you need. And I think that's why people get frustrated with CRMs, because they're either it doesn't do what they want it to do, or it's so complicated that it's that you just don't want to use it because you find all your time is being put up in there. So Peter had a great question in here. I'm going to prop it up there. So, a CRM that you might recommend, simple and helpful for an integrator today. Brad, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say for depending on the size, but for the most part, for an integrator today, HubSpot is probably a good high recommendation that I would take a look at. Pipedrive is another one that I've seen that works really, really well. I've personally used HubSpot. I love it. It's a really, really easy CRM to use. A lot of direct integrations are already built inside that CRM, so you don't have to have some kind of an open API connector like a Zapier or anything like that. It just connects directly in. So if you're using D-Tools or any other kind of proposal software, right, there's opportunities there for you to leverage that way.
And I think that's a good point in there too, Brad, is that if you're going to pick a CRM, take a look at what it integrates with, because if you are using a MailChimp or, a SurveyMonkey or, any of these other tools that are out there, either find a CRM that can do the same thing and maybe save you a couple dollars by integrating it all in-house, or make sure that it has that integration, because nobody wants to be logging into 3 different systems, trying to transfer content over to get it loaded into the CRM. So I think that's a piece in there, as well, Peter. We obviously have, access to iPoint, some other tools that are in there. But
Yep.
Yeah, if you got any questions with that, I'm sure Brad would be happy to chat with you about that too.
I'll give you one because I think it's important. You have to do a proper evaluation of the platform, whatever you pick, doesn't matter which one. And you actually have to run through how it actually works. So I'll give you an example. I use recurring meetings for clients that I have every week at the same day and time. Pipedrive cannot see recurring meetings in its calendar booking tool. So if you're going to use Pipedrive as a calendar tool so that you can send out an email, have someone book in via Pipedrive's tool, and then take somebody off a drip campaign, it can book them right into a time you already have a recurring meeting. And that blew my mind that that's the case. And I called Pipedrive to ask them about that. And they go, no, we can't see recurring meetings other than the first instance. And I went, that tool's off my list. The rest of Pipedrive is fantastic. It's an amazing tool. It's super amazing. But if you use recurring meetings, Pipedrive is not for you. So if you are a manager and a leader, I don't know how you're going to use Pipedrive. I just don't understand it. And the fact that they haven't solved it is almost mind-blowing. So on the other hand, if you're using an ERP tool, so we used a tool called ConnectWise, it's big in the managed services space. It had a perfectly fine CRM. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't mind-blowing, but it's how we handled all of our pipeline. I would not have wanted to use an outside tool because it was fully integrated into the tool we had. And so even though it wasn't amazing and it wasn't fantastic and it wasn't beautiful and shiny, it did exactly what it needed to do. And it allowed, from a management perspective, to manage that process. So I think it really depends a lot on what's going on in your business and how you run. Now, if you don't use recurring meetings, no, Pipedrive's amazing. So I think everybody's a little different in what they do. And so you kind of really do want to do a proper test case scenario.
And I think that's a great point. I always get asked what the best software is. And I was doing a seminar once where I asked somebody, I had everybody raise their hand on a piece of software they like. And I picked on someone and he mentioned a well-known industry brand. And he goes, yeah, it works great. And I go, anybody in here use it and it sucks? And 10 other people raise their hand. I'm like, exactly. Even though we all run the same business and do the same thing, we do it differently. So software is a tool to make your process more efficient. If you don't have your tool well defined, it's not going to be efficient. So to Chris's point, who would have thought, the reoccurring meetings was going to be the hiccup in Pipedrive? Well, if you would have just sat down with your team and just roughly outline the process, what do we do here in all these different stages, you're going to uncover those kind of things that you have to, in that piece of software to make it more efficient.
Hey, Jason, what have you seen in some workshops that you've done from a process perspective of where clients get tripped up the most in terms of trying to evaluate a piece of software or understanding okay, how do we map this thing out and how do we close that gap?
I mean, most people are asking their peers what they use as kind of a top of funnel, right? And then they're looking at features and integrations. They're not looking at their process. And part of it is their process isn't defined and they're trying to select the software to fix process problems. And it's not like you have to have this lasered out process map with all these SOPs and checklists. You just have to have a firm understanding of it. To Chris's point, if bringing in an outside tool means that then you're going to have to transfer all that information manually into an ERP tool, that's a big potential for mistakes and errors. So if the ERP tool has a CRM, let's just figure out how to optimize it to make it better. Because a lot of times you can optimize these tools to bend to your process to a degree. It's never going to be perfect.
Well, and I can speak from experience, Jason, that man, so many people buy a piece of software without a plan or strategy. To your point, it's about the sale. It's about the process, right? Whatever process that might look like. And I can tell you a story. I worked for a manufacturer. We did a pretty hefty amount of revenue per year, upwards of close to $700 million a year, $650 million a year. And we operated a lot on spreadsheets. I mean, I don't even know how that whole organization ran that way for as long as they did, but we did a Salesforce implementation thinking that would fix the process issues with our sales team.
Nope.
And literally 6 months later, the data that we had inside of Salesforce was just as bad as it was when we first started. And it's just like,
You were
wow.
bad at spreadsheets and bad at Salesforce.
Yeah. So it's just, it just speaks volumes around sitting down, having a plan, mapping the process out, whatever that process might look like. Obviously, we're talking about the sales process here, but map that out as a team and be crystal clear on each stage and what your main objectives are. And then you actually have a plan and strategy before you can implement your CRM.
So I'll add to the stage question thing, because I think it's actually really important, right? Brad, you and I have talked about this offline before. A lot of teams are setting percentages just based on feel, hot, warm, cold, I like it, I don't like it, high likelihood, low likelihood, whatever. I got away from all that and I went to action-based. So it forced each of the actions that needed to be taken. And then we could look at any deal in the pipeline and know what action had been taken, what action is next to be taken. And you can actually set intervals to those actions. So for instance, from this step to that step, no less than 1 week, not more than 2, right? Whatever the idea is. And I think when you start to get to action-based approaches and your percentages are based on that, it actually really helps you get a much better feel for the likelihood of percentage close. And so Brad, you and I have talked about this a bit too, but I didn't allow a salesperson to recognize 50% of a deal until a proposal was sent. Why? Because I need you to send it. Like there's literally nothing for them to sign. So can I have 10% of it? No. Can I have 25% of it? No. You may have 0 until you send the document. And when you send the document, mark it as sent, and you now have 50%. And then so we used to use those stages to force the behavior. Now it was good, right? It was the intention of it, right? The customer got a good thing out of it. The salesperson got a good thing out of it. We got a good thing out of it. So I think when we started to kind of move away from these ethereal, gut checks, and we got really into action-based, it really helped everyone be accountable to the process, whatever process was chosen, that was aligned to the business process that we needed. And that was a big takeaway. The other takeaway that I had that you mentioned, I'm 100% in agreement with annual quota. I'm 100% in agreement with quarterly. We then took it to monthly. And one of the things that I realized actually with a lot of integrators, because most of the people on these calls will likely be integrators, is that they actually need a labor quota. And the reason being, they need to sell enough labor to keep the humans busy that do the stuff. And if we're not selling that labor number specifically, we're going to need to trim headcount. And if we're selling more labor than the people we have, we're going to need to add headcount. So one of the things that we didn't do, but I would absolutely be doing today, knowing what I know now, I would absolutely have that monthly quota broken all the way down into a labor component number. And if we were short, we'd have to trim. And if we were exceeding, we'd have to grow. And that to me would have been really transformative, I think, in our understanding of it.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, action-based is that, man, that is key. That is absolutely key. Nothing happens unless action is taken, for sure. In there.
The other part of what Chris said, the underlying thing to me is there's a standard, right? So if you have 10 proposals out, and let's just say it's $5 million, you have a 50% chance, if that's the weight you put on it, that there's $5 million coming in. But if those proposals all are weighted at different percentages, and Jim's putting his gut feel at 80%, and Sue's putting a 20% chance. Like, you can't forecast your business. So it's just like having standards in place, whatever you decide those are.
Well, and it's interesting that this idea of action-based probabilities and having better, it's a skill set. It's kind of like an art and science of forecasting. But I get on a lot of conversations, and I'm sure you guys have conversations about this too. But, some of these custom integrators that are kind of, looking to maybe even exit for that matter kind of thing, or at some point later on down the road, 5-10 years down the road, they have to know these types of numbers, and they've got to know and plan and understand, the revenue metrics behind their business, because when the time comes, those are major levers and points that, a lot of investors take a look at, and it's all habitual. So, the better that you can actually employ this kind of practice inside of your business, the better off you're going to be, not only today, but you're really future-proofing the operation or sales operation of your business for the future.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. So I got one question in here from Peter again, and I may take some of this, but I want to get everybody else's opinion on there as well. So Peter was asking, what are some of the best practices for ramping up a new salesperson, right? So coming into training, what do you do? I mentioned before, like the owner who is the only sales guy. So how do we do that? And he's right. The industry has a ton of technician and, training that's out there. But getting a salesperson. So I have some thoughts that I'm going to throw out there to Peter and such, but Brad, what do you think on that first, or Jason?
Yeah, I'll give some thoughts, and then we'll just go around the room with this, because I know everybody has kind of some things moving around in their head. I can see that on Chris's face too. So I would say, Peter, when you ramp up a new salesperson, especially when somebody's transitioning from a technician to salesperson, you've got to understand what is the goal and objective of that sales role. So think about defining the responsibilities and role of that salesperson. So what I mean by that is this individual salesperson going to be somebody that's going to be focused on driving new business and going out and hunting for new business? Or is this salesperson going to be somebody that's going to be what I call a farmer, right? Somebody that's going to cultivate maybe your existing customer list and go out and re-engage or re-energize, that customer list that you may have, right? So you've got to understand and define what type of salesperson that person's going to be. And then number two, they may know a lot about the systems and technical aspects of putting these systems together. But do they understand the dynamics of essentially kind of the questioning, discovering call, the communication strategies, the go-to-market rhythms that salespeople do on a weekly basis, daily basis, and monthly basis? And that's a whole new kind of behavior pattern moving from a technician to sales. And so I would have a plan and strategy of understanding, number one, what role are they going to play? Because you can say salesperson all day long, but what role is it that they're going to play inside of that sales function? And then number two, what is the roles and responsibilities? And you want to be crystal clear of exactly what they're going to be doing, and understand maybe some of the gaps that they are missing, even if they do have a good product and technical background. So that's kind of the first step that you want to do, is, again, kind of map out what that role might look like. So, but that's my first thought.
Cool.
My take on it at a simple level is it depends a bit on where they're coming from. And I think every person is different, right? So I'm a big fan of 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plans. I think they need to be in writing. I think you need to set that expectation. This would be true of a technician as it is for a salesperson and anyone else. And once you have that idea of an onboarding plan, you have to take into account where they're starting from. Different people are starting from different places. So therefore, the onboarding plan is likely to look quite a lot different. And I think, for instance, one of the common things is software. So have they ever been trained on a CRM? Do they know how to use one? Well, I don't know. Some people are ninjas at Salesforce and HubSpot, and not others, and you might use a different one. So obviously the training then for that person might look a little different. The other thing I think about is training on brands and products. Some people have implicit understanding of these things, and some people don't. The 30, 60, 90 day is going to look different on those brands and products. I can tell you, I was an outside salesperson and traveled for manufacturers. You had a sales manager who sat along and rode shotgun with you. who sat in your meetings with you, who looked at what you were doing and how you were selling. And on the next ride to the next thing, you better believe if you didn't do it right, you were going to hear about it. And they wanted you to rise to that standard. Lots of sales companies also do, sales organizations do shadowing, but they also do role play. Now, you'll see dyed in the wool, long-standing sales guys who will roll their eyes and say, I'm not doing that role play. And it is absolutely how teams make themselves better. We practice before we go live on a customer, right? And so I think everybody comes from different places. And I think knowing where they're starting from is really important. So assessment, and then building the unique plan that would get them to the standard and whatever that standard is. And I think to Brad's point, if they're a hunter versus a farmer, that standard looks a little different because the mechanics of the role is a little different. And so I would just be really kind of conscious about each of those variables of the start point and the end point, and then a plan that looks like what it needs to be to make them good.
Jason, do you have a comment on there before I jumped into it, or?
Yeah, I just kind of add on to what everybody else said. More to Chris's point, like one thing that I like to tell companies is, whenever you have a new employee or you're just finding out where there's something that they're not sure of, they need training, think of it as, is it a skills training or job training, right? Skills training are things that are easily teachable. So there's all your vendors have portals with training platforms. Your buying groups have training platforms. If you need software training, like Chris mentioned, like you could go get that. And then there's job training, which is like how they do their job, right? So you first you need to have that lens of where to split and find out where they need that training, and then from there kind of pick that path. What I find a lot of companies don't have is a way to train them how to do that job in terms of sales trainings, like how we go out and prospect for customers, what questions we ask, that sort of thing. So it's, ties into what everybody else was saying. But to me, like using that lens of job training and skills training at least helps you with that initial assessment.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. So, Peter, I have some general comments on this, and then actually specific to you as a ProSource member. So, Steve reached out to me yesterday on your team, and so we'll set up a call for that specific to what you're looking for. But I think, as you said, the industry does a lot of technical training. We obviously all know that. We go to CEDIA, we take that, those opportunities. But sales training is hugely important. And I think there are a few resources that are out there that I can gather and throw some links out to everybody that registered on here and to you as well, Peter. But, I know one of the things that I'm developing right now, I actually committed to it yesterday, and it goes along with where I am right now too, is building out sales platforms, sales training, so that we have that 30, 60, 90 day, so that we take the individual, as Brad was saying, the hunter and the farmer, think of that as the guy who's in a showroom, for those that have, good sized showrooms that are in there that can talk with the people that walk in and build those conversations, versus the guys that are maybe going out after the architects and the builders, because that's a different skill set. And how do you go after those people? So I think, training in each of those different areas is something that I've looked at. I've worked with businesses in the past where, we figure out those lunch and learns and those CEU courses. I will say right now, like I said, I'm over in the ProSource headquarters in Golden, Colorado, because we are doing a lighting launchpad 3-day course. And that's designed to teach people specific into lighting, obviously in this case, but for salespeople. It's not technicians. We're not programming. This is teaching people how to feel more confident in how to be able to sell and how to use sales tools, in order to aid that. So I think, there are tools that are out there. There are industry groups, like in this case, we have Light Can Help You that's come out that, again, I know most of us in here know, and a lot of people do. For their presentations, they're able to help newer sales guys, or if you're starting to jump into another industry, don't be afraid to bring those in, or theater designers and the rest, because while they're in there, your team is going to be learning from them, and they're going to learn best practices as they're seeing experts to do this. So I think there's a variety of different tools in there. Like I said, I am developing some tools, and first launching out for ProSource. So, like I said, Peter, you'll actually have access to that as a ProSource member. And when I ping back Steve today, I'll CC you on there so that we can talk a little deeper into that and what you guys need from a team in terms of training, and we'll get you set up.
I had one thought on this
Yeah,
idea, and it
please.
kind of almost like we skipped past this idea that it's a requirement. So we talked about, CRMs, we talked about pipelines, and I'm with all that. One of the things that always seems to be interesting when we talk about hiring salespeople is who's the sales manager
Yeah.
and what is their training and who's taken that on. And in some cases, you're going to talk to Brad, and Brad's going to be your sales manager. But in some cases, an owner has hired a salesperson and then just goes, I hired this guy on, and like 6 months later, and it just didn't work out. I don't know why. Cool. Who is the sales manager? Well, what do you mean? Right? And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
got it. Yeah, there was literally we just tossed somebody out into the water, and we hoped that business would show up on our doorstep. And so I think begged the question back to the group about how are we doing sales management? And I think the idea of pipelines and CRMs support that idea, but it doesn't alleviate the need for someone to be that manager. And it might be fractional, and it might be a full-time body that you hire, and so on and so forth. And so I just think it's an important distinction here while we're kind of on the topic.
No, I agree. And actually, I'll throw that all the way back to my good guys days. When I'd run stores, they'd bring me in to fix them, fix morale, fix sales, all those kind of pieces that go into it. And what I'd find over the years, and I found with countless other dealers as I've grown in the last 25, is that the best salespeople do not necessarily make the best sales managers. It's a classic of this guy's rocking and rolling, and we're going to make him a sales manager so he can make 10 more of him. Right. But that doesn't always work, because some of especially if you're in that hunter role, people like to be in that top spot, and a lot of what they have, they're not necessarily, nurturing a second layer of sales teams, whereas having a solid sales manager, they're not necessarily the best closer or your top closer, but maybe they're the ones that are actually helping more of the team to level up in terms of their skills and training. That's really who you want into those roles, because they're going to bring up the whole level of the team, rather than just having one superstar that is the only one that does it. Take basketball, take anything else. It's the same thing every time. So, yeah, like I said, just another little insight in there. I know Peter was asking for some questions. We're, a little past the hour on here. Peter, I'm happy to go even deeper into this or tie Brad into a chat with this or anything else. But does anybody have any sales questions that they just love to use that they want to throw out here before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, if we start on a very, kind of like basic level to get the conversation going, it's really understanding the question I always ask in discovery sales processes is, why are you looking? Or, what is it that interests you about what we do? Would love to learn a little bit more about kind of some of the challenges or some of the things that you're up against. And kind of just that spurs that conversation on as the number one question of why and what challenges are they up against, kind of thing. I mean, I can a lot more, but
I think it's kind of the same context as Brad. I mean, I've been in sales my entire career, and I kind of just go on autopilot. So it's tough to like dig into your brain to say like, what was your process? But like one that comes to mind is like, what problem are you trying to solve? Like, especially because we have so many solutions to sell, and we see this house and this project. We're like, oh, you should put music everywhere, but they may not care about that. So they may just say like, I want to watch TV outside. Okay, cool. Right. In the context of once you're getting into it, and these are not my solutions, but I heard them on a podcast with Matt Bernath, which is when you're trying to qualify a client and a proposal's been built, it was rank the following three things in importance, which is, price, performance, and aesthetics. And when they rank those, you already know kind of like which way they're leaning in terms of products. And I always thought that was like pretty genius, because you could apply that to lighting control, like any product or discipline you're selling. Like, tell me how you feel about aesthetics. Are they important? What about price? What about performance? Boom.
So this question that was posed by Peter, by the way, it doesn't say whether it's to the salesperson about hiring them or as a salesperson asking them to a client. But I'll ask you though, I'll tell you the one that I used for when going towards the salesperson when I'm looking to hire a salesperson. What did the company specialize in? Who did you sell it to? How did you find those customers? What did the company do in annual revenue? What was your contribution to the revenue? What was your average selling price? And if you can't answer all that, you are not a salesperson. I don't care what it is that you do, it is not sales. So if you don't understand all of that about whatever business you're in, I cannot rightfully hire you to be a salesperson in some other company. Like you kind of have to know that. And I'm looking for 10 years of history of that. So we're going back through your work history, and you should be able to explain that because you should know. Like that tells me you're a good salesperson.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you don't know your numbers, if you can't just, spout off what you need, then you're not really paying attention to it. So, Peter, I'll hit you up on, we can answer a little bit more of that. I have a bunch of stuff, and what I'm actually doing for most of the rest of my day is building demo scripts for these theaters. And again, happy to share that stuff with you guys as we go through. I'll probably throw it out onto my social later on once I get it all kind of dialed in. But those are the kinds of things where you have a plan, there's a strategy with it, and then you're spending the time, like everybody else has been saying, digging into what the client needs. What are they actually looking for? And then not just taking what they say at face value. Hey, I'm looking for a new TV, or I'm looking for this or that. Ask them why. What do they like to watch? What do they like to listen to? Like Jason said, maybe they care about music, maybe they don't. But you're not going to know that until you get into this. And oftentimes that's what leads into the best sales. And not only that, they may buy something today, but you're really trying to build that relationship forever. Not just make one sale. So again, I think that's where taking the time to build that relationship and ask those probing questions in the beginning. And I'm happy to do what we can to share a little bit more with that with you, as we go through and chat maybe this or next week. So cool, you guys. I think that seems to hit all of the questions in there. We, as always, appreciate everybody listening live. And I know a lot of people will be checking out the recording because hopefully most of our integrators are out in the field, if they're at smaller companies. So yeah, we'll take a look again. I don't know that we know what we're doing next topic yet, but it'll probably rotate around. So my guess is that next time it will be Jason and myself kind of leading the charge. So probably talking about some process and some training.
Awesome.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
if there's ideas for topics out there, feel free to send them over to us.
Please do. Please do. So
quick. Oh, I guess for anybody that's still on, would love to kind of get a temperature gauge if anybody wants to respond back around topics of the tariffs. So if that's something that we want to talk about next, would love to hear feedback whenever you guys get a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll send an email out to everybody that registered so that you can send that out, maybe a quick 1 or 2 question survey on there just to get some of that feedback on this webinar as well as for the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.